Hi everyone, I hope you're all doing good. So, you know about my book, which is published in Amazon. So, I thought I will make these videos. Some people like to buy the book and then study by themselves, but then there are others who would want to watch the videos. Maybe they're traveling in a train, or just they're doing a lot of travel and they want to utilize this time to prepare for the exam. So I thought of making these videos of the entire book. So I will explain lesson by lesson. I will explain all the concepts. So this will make you well prepared for to answer your theory exam. So I will start with an introduction today, and then we will go over all the lessons, right? So this theory book, if you want, you can order that on amazon.com. I will put the link in the description. All right, so let's start. So this is the latest book, and so let's look at what we cover in this theory book, or let's look at what we will cover in this series of videos, right, that I will prepare. So basically, we have 7 lessons, and so there is how do I use this book? So let's go there. Um, and first, let's look at all the lessons. Uh, so if you have already purchased this book, then you can go to this section and then you can see how you can use this book. Then there are frequently asked questions on, let's say, the theory exam, the duration, the price of the exam, the translation, and all those things. And then there is the first lesson was the introduction to the traffic boards. Basically, we will talk about all the traffic boards. We will talk about all the general rules. We know there are different types of traffic boards: warning, priority, obligatory, prohibition, parking information. So these are 6 type of traffic boards. So in this lesson, we will understand how we can identify those boards. So in the exam, if you get a question on a traffic board, then you should be able to, quickly understand, okay, this is a warning board and this should be the most likely answer, or this is a prohibition board, or this is an obligatory board. So we will discuss all those topics in this lessons. Then we have under plates, which are the white plates or blue plates, which are placed below the traffic boards. So we will also discuss about those, why those plates are there, and what kind of information they are providing. And finally, we will finish up with a summary, and then we have a few practice questions. Now, when we move to lesson 2, we will talk about priority. So this is a very important lesson because this is a, where there is a possibility of accidents happening, mostly at the junctions or crossroads. So we will start with hierarchy of priority, and then we will see who has more priority, what you should follow. If there are, let's say, if there are traffic lights and road markings, what do you follow? If there are no road markings, then what do you follow? If there is a police and light, what do you follow? Who should you follow? We will discuss uh, those things in hierarchy of priority. Then we will go one by one. Priority 1, which is the authorized person. Who are authorized persons, and what what are the directions an authorized person can give you, right? What is an authorized person allowed to do that you should follow? So those things we will discuss here. It's important that we understand who the authorized person is, right? Next, we move over to traffic lights. And here we will talk about the regular traffic lights, the round shaped traffic lights, so the different kind of traffic lights. Then we will also talk about the evacuation light. What is an evacuation light? How do you identify that it's an evacuation light? What are the things you should remember when you see an evacuation light? Those things. And then we'll talk about bicycle lights, pedestrian lights, tram and bus lights. So this is also important because sometimes you are, let's say there's an obstacle and you are driving on the tram lane or bus lane. And then what do? If you don't understand the tram and bus traffic lights, then it becomes very difficult. It is very easy. I'll give you tips and tricks how you can identify all these things. How do you compare the traffic lights of tram and the regular traffic lights so you can relate to those, and these things become very easy. Then very, very important, it's are these level crossing lights. So there are a lot of things that you have to be careful with respect to level crossing, because it's an offense of category 4, right? So, you will lose 5 marks if you answer questions related to level crossing lights incorrect. You will also lose 5 marks if you answer questions wrong to authorized persons. So you have to be very careful when you are, studying uh, about these topics. So after level crossing, we will go to traffic boards and road markings. So what are traffic boards? We would have covered this a little bit in lesson 1, but here we will go into more details in the sense, yeah, on a general way about the traffic boards. And what are road markings? How are these two different? Are they really different, or so those are the things that we will discuss. We will also talk about the bicycle lane and the pedestrian crossing. Very important. What a bicycle lane is, how you will identify a bicycle lane. There's also something called a suggestion lane. What are the differences? What are pedestrian crossings? How you will identify them? All those things. Who has priority at these points? And then we will also discuss why someone who's having a priority at the junction, why does that person have priority, right? We will discuss those things. Next, we will, in the same lesson, we will also talk about stopping space for bicycles and mopeds. So we will see this and what are those boxes at the junctions. And then we will talk about pre-sorting lanes. How do you do pre-sorting? How do you identify what a pre-sorting, where one can do a pre-sorting? Is one allowed to do pre-sorting, or is it prohibited? Those are the things we will also study here. Then there is a priority road. So what is a priority road? How do you identify a priority road? What does it mean to be driving on a priority road, right? So that we will explain in this lesson. Further, we will go into traffic rules, which is the priority 4, the last priority, of course. So this is interesting, and this is important to understand. What do I do when there are no traffic boards, no traffic lights? What should I do? That those topics we will cover in traffic rules. And then a very, very common traffic rule in Belgium is priority from right. So what is this priority of right? So we will discuss about that, how you will understand the priority of right, and then how you will follow that. It is very important to understand this to avoid accidents. Let's say even when you're doing your practical exam, it is very important to know priority of right. Okay. And then we will also see when does priority of right applies. So should you give priority, should you follow priority of right at under a specific situation, or should you not follow priority of right? Do you have a priority? Does the other driver have priority? These are the things we will discuss in this topic. Then we will talk about priority traffic boards, right? At a junction, you will see some traffic boards which tell you who has priority, and we need to understand these as well, because these things are very important, the priority of right and the priority of traffic boards. Do you follow priority of right, or should you follow the priority of traffic boards? So we will understand that in this lesson. And like all lessons, we have practice questions, and then we will also we also have answers to practice questions. So we will see, because on our platform we also have more than 700 questions, practice questions. So we will try to, I will put the link to our platform also in the description. So you can actually go there and practice more questions if you want to do that on these specific topics. The next lesson is we will talk about cross point or a junction, where more than two roads meet. So here we will talk about what is crossing and turning, how those are different, crossing of vehicles. And we will talk about maneuvers. What are maneuvers? So it is important that you understand what maneuvers are, because then it relates to priority. Someone who's doing maneuver, should he give priority? Does he get priority? Those are the things that we will explain here. So what are the general rules when you are doing a maneuver? First is, what are maneuvers? There are certain things that you need to understand. It's again very easy. It's nothing like you have to memorize it. It's very easy that you will identify maneuvers once we have done this lesson. Then we will talk about turning right, turning left, what things you need to be careful of, pay attention to when you are turning right and turning left. So the next is about roundabouts. And here we will talk about first is how do you identify a roundabout, and then is this a roundabout? Sometimes you might see places which look like roundabout, but they are really not roundabout. So if they are roundabout, then it's a different story. There are different rules, then there are different priorities. If it is not a roundabout, then it's a different story. So you need to understand a roundabout, and that we will discuss here. And then we will discuss how do you enter and how do you exit a roundabout, right? And then we will also talk about bicycle lanes or at roundabouts. So sometimes you will see that there are bicycle lanes. So here we will understand, are these bicycle lanes a part of roundabout or are they not part of roundabout? Again, depending on those two things, you will have to give priority, or the bicycles, or you have priority. So it is also important that we understand if the bicycle lane is part of roundabout or not, or is not part of roundabout. Then we have the board's summary, cross-point traffic board summary, practice questions and answers. Then lesson 4 is very important because we talk about roads, the public roads. So we start with who the road users are. So we will clearly define what pedestrians are. Who is a pedestrian? I mean, when you see a person walking on a road, is he a pedestrian? Is he a driver? Or, we will answer all those questions. Someone who's using, let's say, the footpath or the sidewalk, is that person a driver or a pedestrian? We will answer those questions in this lesson. So the next thing we will also talk about, where can pedestrians walk? We'll also talk about who the drivers are. So what's the difference between pedestrians and drivers? We will explain that. It's important because, depending on our understanding of driver and pedestrians, we might be able to answer a lot of questions correctly in the exam. Driving past pedestrians, how do you drive when you're driving next to pedestrians? Is that in a built-up area, outside built-up area? What are the conditions? What are the rules you need to follow? And as I said, I'll also give you tips, and I'll also explain you the background on why something is like this, why the other thing is like that. Those things will help you remember these concepts much better. Then driving past the cyclists, like driving past the pedestrians, we also have rules when you are driving past the cyclists. Then if there are a group of bicycles on the road, what will you do? And then driving past other groups. So there could be a procession, and how do you drive past this procession? So we will explain that in this lesson or in this topic. Then we will talk about buses and passengers, and we will talk about what priority vehicles are. How do you identify if a vehicle is a priority vehicle? Again, it becomes important because then should you give priority to the vehicle or should you just continue driving, depending on our understanding of a priority vehicle, right? Okay. Then we will talk about the public roads. So what is a public road? From where to where is a public road? How do you identify? Is this a public road? Is this part of road or is this part of property, a public road, or is that a private property, right? So depending on our understanding, then we would be able to say, okay, the traffic rules apply here, they don't apply here, and so on. Then we move on to types of public roads. How do you identify, the different types of public roads? Parts of public roads, is a central verge part of a public road, for example? Is a lane part of a public road? These are, so we will see everything that is part of a public road, and we will explain all the all the parts of the road that is, part of a public road. So then we will talk about roads that converge. We will talk about level crossing, again very important. This is the place where the trains cross the roads. Then there are road markings. We will talk about crossing by pedestrians and bicycles. What is a reserved bus lane? How do we identify a reserved bus lane? It's again important because on a reserved bus lane, the rules that apply on a reserved bus lane are totally different from different roads, right? For example, a bus lane. What's the difference between a reserved bus lane and a bus lane? The rules are totally different, and we need to identify these two things for us to be able to answer the questions correctly. Also, in the practical exam, to be able to drive correctly on the road and pass the practical exam. So continuous white strips or checkboards. So what are these markings on the road? What do they mean when you see this? Those are the topics we will cover here. What are lane reduction arrows? What should you be careful of when you see this? And your position on the road when you're driving, how should your position be? When you're turning, how should your position be, and things. There is a rescue lane. We will talk about this. So what is a rescue lane? How do you form a rescue lane? Is that a permanent lane or is that something else? These are the things we will talk about rescue lane. And then we will talk about accidents on the road. Then we move on to the private roads. So how is a private road different from a public road? What applies on a private road and what applies on a public road? So we will talk about the public and private terrain here. Then we have the roads, traffic boards. And then we move on to the next lesson, which is lesson 5, the speed and overtaking. So when we talk about speed and overtaking, this is again critical because overtaking topics are usually 5-mark questions. So if you answer those wrong, then there is a very likely a possibility that you will lose 5 marks in the theory. So what are the general rules on the speed that you need to understand? What's a very common rule on speed when you are driving? So that we will explain here. What are the speed limits in a built-up area, outside built-up area, speed limits on motorway? We will also talk about what are the maximum and minimum speeds on a motorway. So we will talk about the Wallonia region, we will talk about the Flemish region, we will talk about Brussels region. So we will cover all those topics here, right? So then stopping on a motorway, and when we are talking about motorways, we will also talk about, you know, some prohibitions on motorway. What are the prohibitions? What should you never do on a motorway? Then we will also talk about exit lanes on a motorway, rush hour lanes on a motorway. So everything about motorway we will cover here. Then we will move on to expressway. How is an expressway different from a motorway? And then are the prohibitions on expressway? How do you identify if this is an expressway or this is a motorway, right? And then the next is very interesting and very important again. The speed limits on different places, like we will list all those places here. And then we will talk about a zone 30. We'll talk about the speeds on bicycle street. We'll talk about speeds on reserved roads, pub road humps. We'll talk about speeds on residential area. What in a pedestrian zone, play street, school street. What are the prohibitions? What are the regulations? Are you allowed to drive? What is the speed with which you will drive on these roads? So we will cover all those here. And as I said, I will also give explanations on why some things, why it is like this, right? So that you can remember those concepts well. In the exam, it becomes very difficult. Okay, was that speed for a residential area or was that for a play street? So I'll give you explanations, then it helps you remember these differences, these small differences very easily for the exam. Next, we move on to overtaking topic. So here we will talk about general overtaking rules. What are the rules? What's a general rule or what are the few general rules for overtaking? We will explain how to overtake, what you need to take care of, or what are the steps when you are overtaking, and what do you do? What is overtaking of more than one vehicle at a time? What is double overtaking? So people usually get confused with these two terms, a double overtaking and overtaking of more than one vehicle at a time. Where do these apply? Are there any prohibitions? What are the regulations for this? Right. And then overtaking trams, is this allowed? And if it is, then how is it done? So overtaking trams is totally different from overtaking other cars or other vehicles. So we need to understand this difference, right? And what is not overtaking? This is also very important because the rules and regulations for overtaking don't apply in this case, right? So let's say, I mean, if it's there are a lot of vehicles moving and then let's say it looks like it's overtaking, but it is not really overtaking, or is it overtaking? We need to understand these small differences, right? Because then the rules change. And what is prohibition on overtaking? What are the prohibitions for overtaking? And what is zipping? Zipping is also a very important concept that you should understand. How is zipping performed? When is it performed? So those things we will explain in this topic. And then we move on to braking and stopping distance. So these are small calculations that you need to do to understand, okay, braking and stopping distance. If I apply brake, how many meters after will my car stop? On a wet road, does it change? When a person is intoxicated, do these things change? So those topics we will cover here. Then we will talk about the traffic boards related to speed and overtaking. And then we move on to lesson 6, waiting and parking. In lesson 6, we will understand the basic definitions of what is waiting, what is parking, and what is stopping, right? So it's important that we understand these differences clearly. Is it waiting? Is it stopping? Or is it parking? Does this word apply for parking or waiting or stopping? Those things. Then we will understand the warning indicators in the car. Then we will move on to what are these warning indicators, and then we will talk about traffic boards related to parking and waiting. We'll also discuss about alternate parking. This is a very special situation. And alternate parking, where is it done? How is it done? How do you identify if it's alternate parking that applies here or not? So that topic we discuss here. Then we move on to see if a waiting and parking is allowed. Where is waiting and parking allowed? What is limited parking? What are the blue disc parking? Those parking zones. If it's a zone that allows you to use a blue disc for parking or not? Is it a paid parking? Is it a reserved parking place? Is it a parking that is reserved for less able parking? So these differences we will understand in this topic, and we will also understand how to identify these different places of parking. Then we will move on to waiting and parking prohibited. So where is waiting and parking prohibited? And then we will move on to where parking is prohibited and waiting is allowed, right? And we'll also discuss how do you leave a parked vehicle behind. This also applies for your practical exam. And then we will look at the traffic board's summary related to parking and waiting. The last lesson we will talk about technical, even though it's not very critical, but it's still a 1 mark question. So it's important that we also understand the technical concepts. So we will talk about road and safety. We'll talk about able to drive. Is a person able to drive? Should he drive? Should she drive? Should a person, take a taxi instead of driving? So those are the things. We'll talk about the influence of drug and alcohol on driving. Then we'll talk about seat belts, the prohibitions related, the exceptions related to seat belts. What are the seat belts? Who must wear the seat belts? These are the topics we'll discuss here. Then exceptions to wear seat belts, who is accepted. Then we will talk about what is mandatory things to keep in your vehicle, in your car, and placing the warning triangles. Let's say you have a your car has a breakdown, and then where do you place the warning triangles? Is it again depends on the motorway and inside built up area, outside built up area, there are different conditions. So we will understand those here. Then we will talk about technical, what is about the driver license itself, about the provisional license, learner license, what are the conditions, when you can start applying for a license, when you can start, really driving passengers. Those are the things we will discuss here. What are the documents you need to keep in your car always? Those are the things here we will talk about. And then we will move on to your vehicle itself, where we will talk about MAG and MGW. These two concepts are sometimes very confusing to a lot of people. And there are a lot of questions which are related to this. So you need to understand, is this a gross weight of the vehicle or is this the maximum allowed weight of the vehicle? Depending, if you don't understand that, you will not be able to answer the question correctly, right? So those, we will try to make those concepts very clear. Again, it's not difficult. I'll give you a clear explanation on how to identify this, how to identify the other thing. A very short mnemonic to remember, just 4 letters, and then you will be able to answer these questions correctly. So here we'll see if we can identify a question if it's MAW or MGW. We'll talk about vehicle measurements. What are the maximum vehicle measurements allowed? Dangerous goods, and we will talk about what is towing. Where is it? What is towing? Where is it allowed? How is it done? Those are the things we'll discuss here. We'll talk about the vehicle lights, the front lights, the back lights, the indicators. We'll talk about all those things. using how do you use the vehicle lights, the high beam lights, when do you use those light low beam lights, when do you use the fog lamps, are those mandatory? Those are the things we talk about. And also about the vehicle horn. Should you honk? Should you not honk? Where are you allowed to honk? Those are the things. Then we'll talk about tires of the vehicle itself. What is the depth of the tread that needs to be for you to drive safely, and braking and vehicle control. And then we will talk about the cruise control, what it is. And then when we talk about the mobility and environment, we will talk about what a low emission zone is. How do you identify a low emission zone? Are you allowed to drive in a low emission zone? How do you optimize fuel consumption? And what is smog? And then very important topic on violation and offenses. What are the four levels of offenses? And we will talk about list of third grade offense. We will also talk about list of fourth grade offenses. What is recidivism? How do you? Okay, it's a term that is used for a judge to give a sentence or a penalty to a person. So we'll understand that. And then we will talk about accidents, traffic boards summary, and we end with this. So these 7 topics should help you prepare very well for your theory exam, as well as will help for your practical exam. So stay tuned as we go through one chapter every time in all the videos. So you can watch all these lessons, or you can on drivingtheory.be. I'll put the link in the description. Till next time,